Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, with a look at the very unusual Sharp Aquos crystal, which is being sold in the US as a Sprint exclusive. It's also available on their MVNOs like Boost Mobile and Virgin Mobile for $150 off contract. So it's being sold as a prepaid phone. So obviously the big standout feature here is that edgeless display. So you can see there's virtually no bezel surrounding parts of the phone, but of course there is a fairly large chin bezel housing some of the sensors, the front-facing camera. Now in order to achieve this unique design, they've eliminated the earpiece and replace it with a direct wave receiver. Now that means it vibrates the glass panel to act as your speaker, so when you place it next to your ear, it sounds like a regular speaker. So it's very interesting technology. Now in terms of specs, this is a fairly low-end phone. This has got a Snapdragon 400 clocked at 1.2 gigahertz. We have 1.5 gigs of RAM, 8 gigs of internal storage standard with a 128 gig SD card slot for expansion. We also have an 8 megapixel camera on the back, good for 1080p HD video at 30 frames per second, and a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. And of course, we're going to demonstrate those in this video. Alright, so let's get into this unboxing. Now, of course, this is a prepaid phone with that traditional prepaid packaging. So I have a little tab up here to pull. So now we can just slide it right out. Alright, so we get this little blister pack here, and we have our paperwork. So we have a quick start guide, obviously produced by Sprint. So we're going to go through a lot of the features in this video, some important regulatory information. Alright, so you can see some of the accessories in the back here, which includes a USB cable, a recycling bag for your old phone, and it looks like some more paperwork. So let's go and crack into this right here. Alright, so there is the phone, and you can see I have the black version here, which is, I believe, unique to the Sprint carrier. So there we go. Very nice looking phone. I'm really impressed right away. Very compact for a 5-inch phone. So let's set that aside for just a moment. Get these contents out of the way. So as you can see here, we have a universal wall adapter with a USB port on one side, along with our micro USB charging cable. Pretty basic stuff. And then we have some paperwork explaining how to remove the back panel and that sort of thing. And then we have our recycling bag for recycling our old phone if we want. Alright, so there is our phone with a piece of plastic covering it. So we're going to take this off. There we go. That really nice edge-to-edge glass display. Very unique. Definitely unlike any phone I've handled before. Alright, so let's get this started. Just going to tap and hold the power button at the top here so we can start taking a look around. So there we go. Let's take a close look at the hardware design. And as you can see, the big story here is that edgeless display. Very unique. Certainly unusual to handle if you're used to smartphones. You've never handled anything quite like this before. Now, the crystal gets its name for the way the cover glass is cut and beveled at the edges, and that merges perfectly with the metal frame of the phone. Very nice looking design, very high quality. Now, it feels really nice in the hand because you have that seamless design. It just looks very unusual, and I like the way it kind of reflects the display. It's actually kind of similar to the Moto 360, which also has a beveled edge around the glass panel. Now, instead of at the top, at the bottom, you'll find the front-facing 1.2 megapixel camera. So it's kind of an unusual position, so we're going to have to explore how this works. And then we have our ambient light sensor, our proximity sensor, and an LED notification light. Now, at the bottom of the phone, you'll find a micro USB charging port as well as a microphone, which is your mouthpiece. Now on the right side, not much going on here, but on the left side, you'll find your volume rocker, which is a little too flush, a little more recessed than I'd like to see. Doesn't feel quite as tactile. That's also true at the top of the phone, where you'll find the power sleep wake button, which again is a little too recessed, not as tactile as I'd like to see. And then we have our 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. So on the back, we have a dimpled matte plastic removable back panel, which is black on Sprint, white on Boost Mobile, and I believe Virgin as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and peel off this back panel here, which is pretty basic. It's just a simple piece of thin plastic that's rigid once attached. There's no NFC or anything that's built into that back cover. Now you can see we have our sealed in 2040 milliamp hour battery, so you can't replace that. Now this phone uses a nano SIM, and then we have a micro SD card slot, which again supports 128 gig cards. Now down here below, you'll see our loudspeaker, which is sealed up behind that back panel. Alright, so let's go ahead and seal up this back panel, and you really have to make sure it's sealed up. There's a lot of snaps here. Alright, so let's take a close look at the interface. Again, this is Android 4.4.2. You can swipe to the right here on the lock screen to activate the camera. Of course, we're going to take a close look at the camera app in detail. You can swipe down to get to your notification panel with your expandable notifications. You can tap up here to see all your quick settings and jump to your settings panel here, which has a few modifications we're going to take a look at in just a moment. You can also use a 2-finger gesture to get to your quick settings. Again, they're pretty basic here. You can toggle on your brightness. We do have auto mode in here as well. Now, in terms of the app selection, you can see it's pretty much stock Android with Google apps as well as a few third-party apps. So you'll see a Sprint app for voicemail, the voice dialer. You also see this voice assistant, which is an alternative to Google Now. Now to get to Google Now, you just swipe up from the home button or any of these buttons, takes you right there. And of course you can say, okay Google, What's the weather like tomorrow in Rochester Hills?
Tomorrow's forecast for Rochester Hills is 66 degrees with a chance of showers.
Now, of course, you can fold our items just by dragging and dropping over each other. Again, pretty stock stuff. You can also tap and hold anywhere on the home screen to edit your wallpapers. We also have our recent apps, and as you can see here, pretty familiar stuff. Very little is different from stock Android. Now, there are a few unique features here to the Sharp, so we can go under settings to find some of them, which includes Harman Kardon audio. So basically, this is a way of improving audio thanks to the processing of Clarify audio. Clarify will improve the performance of compressed audio over Bluetooth audio or headphones, not over the speaker. We also have the Clarify Visualizer, which pops up anytime you're playing audio. So we're going to take a look at that in just a moment. We also have Live Stage. This, again, is another way of improving audio depending on the way you're listening to it, so either headphones or Bluetooth audio. So when you're watching or listening to anything with audio, when you hit the volume button, you get to this little control panel, which pops up here. So this allows you to enable this little visualizer here, which is always present when you're listening to audio. But if you tap on it, you can close this, or you can disable Clarify, like so. So if you're not listening to anything currently, you can see that control panel disappears, but when you activate anything with audio, it comes back. Now, this phone does have a few interesting tricks here. One of them is the ability to just swipe across a locked screen to wake it up, and then you can unlock it. You can also just shake the phone like so to relock it. So again, swipe across the screen, unlock it, shake to lock it again. So it's a very nice effect. You can also see that when I wake up the screen, you get this little flash, which is a feature that is available under settings as well. So if you go to settings here, go to display. Under frameless effect, you have several options here under display light on. So you can see we have flow, ambient, and diffusion, or you can turn it off entirely. You can also enable a flashing alarm effect, so it flashes the edges of the screen when an alarm is going off. And when you start charging, you get this little effect here that swipes across the screen. Now, also under display is our screen on off by motion gestures here. So we have the sweep on effect for waking up the device, the shake off effect for putting it to sleep, and then you have something else called the stay on effect, which will prevent the display from going to sleep if you're handling the phone. And then if you place it flat on a table, it will automatically turn off, and when you pick it up again, it'll turn back on. We also have a little screen grab utility also available under settings, which you can toggle on and off. It's under device. It's called Clip now. So you can turn this on, and basically what it does, if you swipe across the top of the screen, like so, does a little screen grab, and you have some control over it, so you can tap and hold on it. And if you want to confirm it, just swipe like so. Alternatively, just tap and hold the power and volume down button to do the same thing. Now, personally, I prefer to disable this feature because I'm accidentally triggering it all the time when I just mean to bring down the drop-down shade. Now, the camera is pretty full-featured, so we can snap a photograph, we can tap anywhere on the scene to adjust exposure and focus, and you can see it's definitely not the quickest AF out there. It's also not the quickest to take photographs. You can pinch in and out to zoom in. Of course, that's just digital cropping. You can toggle between video and photo mode here. You can start recording your video, and you can snap a photograph while recording video and stop it when you're done. Now, you do not have pause here, and you can see it goes right into our gallery, and you can see that effect is a little slow. Under settings, you'll see things like our white balance. You can set to auto or select one of the other conditions. We have our mic settings, so you can turn that on or off if you want. We also have our focus settings for AF and macro and that sort of thing. So again, lots of controls. We also have our anti-flicker, so we can change that from auto to 50 Hertz to 60 Hertz, so it depends on if you're looking at a display or something like that that might be flickering. We also have our time-lapse settings, so we do have time-lapse with several options. Now in still mode, we have our ISO, white balance, our shutter mode. Shutter mode includes smile detect and turnaround detect. We also have our self-timer, touchscreen shutter, so if you want to take a photograph when you touch the screen, you can enable that as well. We also have our timer, and then we have our autofocusing selections here, so you can select AF, center AF, macro AF, that sort of thing. We also have anti-shake, which is digital stabilization, and then we have anti-flicker, again for 50 Hertz or 60 Hertz refresh rates. We have some other interesting tricks up here, so you can see our resolution options. So if you want a 16:9 aspect ratio, you have to downgrade to 16 or 6 megapixels instead of 8 megapixels. 8 megapixels is 4:3. We also have our grid lines, and there are a variety of grid lines you can select. These are basically guidelines for framing your shots. You'll see things like the golden ratio, the triangle, the golden section, triangle 2, and quite a few others. Now in terms of quality, this camera is actually pretty decent in bright sunlight or ideal conditions, so it delivers pretty sharp results, better than I expected. Color accuracy is pretty decent. It's a little undersaturated, but it's definitely not as bad as I expected. Now, it's definitely much worse in low light conditions. This camera is almost unusable, has a hard time focusing, and when it processes the image, everything comes out very soft. Now, in terms of video quality, again, this camera maxes out at 1080p resolution, which is to be expected with a budget phone. Now, the quality is actually pretty decent under ideal conditions. It does tend to underexpose, just like it does with the photographs, and white balance tends to get a little out of hand, tends to go all over the place trying to adjust for the scene. It also has a hard time finding the right exposure. It tends to underexpose or overexpose depending on the light conditions, and tends to bounce around quite a bit. So again, this is a budget phone with budget specs and budget processing power, so that's to be expected here, but it's a little better than average. Now, because our front-facing camera is at the bottom of the phone, when using it in this orientation, it's basically pointing up at your chin, which isn't very flattering. So when you activate the camera, it actually coaches you to flip it upside down. So when you flip it upside down, again, it acts more like a traditional front-facing camera. Alright guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, testing out the front-facing camera of the Sharp Aquos Crystal, which is doing a pretty poor job exposing the scene here. As you can see, I look pretty dark, so again, underexposed just like the rear-facing camera. Again, fairly mediocre results. This is 720p. You can see there's a lot of color noise, a lot of distortion. Again, I'm recording at 720p, but of course you can record in VGA or less. This is to be expected with a low budget phone. Again, not great optics, not a great sensor, not a lot of light going into that sensor from those optics. And as you can see, I'm kind of straining to hold it far enough away from me to fit into the image, just because the lens isn't well optimized for this front-facing mode here. So definitely not the best front-facing camera you're going to get, so don't buy it if that's important to you. Now, Sharp has done a very nice job with this LCD IPS display. Excellent off-axis viewing angles, fairly bright with bright, vivid colors, and generally looks really good, especially outdoors. Text is sharp, even though it's not the highest resolution display, it's still pretty sharp. My only complaint here is that it's not quite as bright. Whites are not quite as crisp as I'd like to see, but generally speaking, it's definitely a really attractive display. Now, there are two issues with this display. One of them is stuck pixels. I've noticed a few of them right out of the box, which is not entirely uncommon on lower-end devices. I've noticed it, for example, on the Moto G I reviewed recently. But the other issue here is perhaps more of a nuisance, and that is light leaking along the side. You can actually see the backlight of the display when you pitch the phone at certain angles. Now, the chamfered edge of the glass seems to reflect it more at certain angles, and then when you look at an extreme angle, you can see it again. Now, it seems to be more prominent on the left-hand side of my device, but you can see it again as well on the right side of the device, but again, more prominent on the left-hand side. But generally speaking, it's not a huge nuisance here, but it's definitely going to be noticeable for a lot of people. Now, with our Geekbench 3 scores, you can see obviously much lower performance than something like the iPhone 6, but of course, huge difference in pricing as well. Now, because we're running Android 4.4 in a fairly stock configuration, the performance on this device is really smooth and quick despite its low-end specs. That tends to be the case for a lot of low-end phones running stock Android. Now, of course, we have that 720p display, so there's not a lot of pixels to push here, so it's able to keep up pretty smoothly. Now, certain apps will choke. The camera app could be a little quicker, and sometimes when you're scrolling through a website, it has a harder time keeping up with only 1.5 gigs of RAM. Now, in terms of that direct wave earpiece technology that turns the glass display into a speaker, it sounds better than you expect, although it's definitely not as good as a traditional speaker. It's not quite as loud, not quite as clear, and tends to be much higher and prone to high-end frequency distortion. The benefit of this technology, however, is that no matter where you place the device on your ear, any part of the screen, it works the same. So that means audio quality is consistent no matter where you place the phone on your ear. Now, battery life is actually pretty decent here. After 1 day and 12 hours of use with about 3 hours of on-screen time, a little more than 3 hours of on-screen time at maximum brightness, our battery was down to about 6 or 7%. So pretty decent results overall. Now, I really like the form factor of this phone, thanks to its very compact bezel-less design. Of course, you have this fairly large bezel at the bottom, which seems a little off balance with the rest of the phone, perhaps a little bigger than it should be, but it does provide a nice surface area to grip the phone when you need to handle it in landscape orientation. But because this phone isn't razor thin, it's got a nice angled edge along the side, you do have a lot of area to grip onto the phone without touching the display. If this phone was even thinner, you would probably run into issues where you have to grip the phone by touching the edge of the display, which will cause problems. So here, it seems to be just perfectly designed. It's got a nice curve on the back, it's the right weight, the right thickness. So generally speaking, I'm pretty impressed by the overall form factor. Now, in terms of the rear-facing speaker, definitely not a highlight here. This tends to sound very tinny, pretty low-pitched, and definitely not as full as most rear-facing speakers on premium phones. So again, this is prone to positional distortion, but the speaker is loud and generally decent enough for most uses. We also have a new and improved S Pen with twice the sensitivity levels of the Note 3. Now the battery capacity has been bumped up by 20 milliamp hours from the 3200 from last year's Note 3. Now the other big story with the Note... So in the end, this phone is very interesting for a number of reasons, mostly for its design and its pricing. It's a pretty decent phone for its price, and it's definitely a standout design in a crowd of pretty forgettable prepaid options. So without a doubt, the Aquos, although not a high-end phone by any means, definitely provides an option for those looking for a budget smartphone. So that's going to do for me in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.